You are listening to episode number 60 of the Secondary Science Simplified podcast. We are 1 week out from Valentine's Day, and to me, that means that love is in the air. And it has me thinking about all the times that I have fallen in love in my lifetime. And I like to say that I have fallen in love at first sight 5 times. I know for a fact that the day I met my husband, I fell in love with him. And then also, each time one of my children were born, I fell in love at first sight. And then time number 5, I like to devote to when I was first introduced to teaching with packets. Okay, so cheesy and maybe a little bit of a hyperbole, but hear me out. So many years ago, when I landed my first official teaching job, I was teaching biology, which was a high stakes state EOC exam based course in the state I was teaching in. And I was teaching alongside a team of 4 other biology teachers. And these teachers had a system of teaching with packets. And I had never seen anything like it before, in the different programs within my teacher certification where I was shadowing or being mentored under some other teachers. And in my student teaching experience, I hadn't seen anything like it. But I saw that they had insane test score results on the EOC. I'm talking 90% and up pass rates year after year. And much of this they attributed to the packet strategy that they were using. And so needless to say, I was super intrigued. I had also tried using interactive notebooks during my student teaching experience, and I just found that they weren't for me. So I knew I wanted to try something different. And also I didn't really have a choice because we kind of had to do the same thing. That was something that our school had decided for our department. So I jumped all in to see what they were about. And it really did feel like love at first sight because I was like, this is so for me. And I know that it may not be for everyone, but if you've ever felt like interactive notebooks aren't really for you, what you're doing with your students and organization just never really feels very seamless, it always feels like a lot, then you might want to consider packets. And so that's what we are going to talk about in this episode today. We're going to talk about what packets are, why I am personally so obsessed with them, what teaching with packets looks like practically, of course, because that's what this podcast is all about. And then also I'll give you some tips about how I make my packets for my own students. So we're going to cover all of this and more today. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I'm passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You're in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. Okay, before we get started, I want to make sure you know, my beloved podcast listeners, who I'm so grateful for, I have some free resources for you. I created 4 high school science activities specifically themed for Valentine's Day last year, and I sent them out to my email list, and I want to make sure that you grab them if you aren't on my email list right now, because they are totally free, and they will be perfect for using this week or next week with your students if you want to do something seasonal and fun, but still relevant and a worthwhile learning experience with them. So if you want to grab them, you just need to head to bit.ly/INRS-VDay. It's our Rocket Science V-Day, INRS V-Day, or you just click the link in my show notes. That's the easiest thing. And you can join my email list and you will immediately receive an email with the download link. So if you don't see that email as soon as you input your information, check your junk folder if you're not seeing it in your inbox. Because oftentimes if you have a .edu email address, or if you're using your school email address, that's like a k12.sc.us email, whatever, your school might have a filter on it where your emails from people like me just go straight to your junk box. So check there and mark me as, part of your address book so that my emails will go into your inbox from now on. But also, if you still don't see it, you might just want to go ahead and use your personal email. I've also seen recently that some schools will automatically just delete stuff. So it won't even be in your junk. It'll just be in your trash. So maybe use your personal email. That way you just don't miss out on these freebies. They're so fun. I wrote one specifically for biology, one for anatomy, one for physics, and one for chemistry. And so no matter what content area you teach, one of those will probably fall into, being relevant for you and your students. And I think they'll have a lot of fun with them. And as always, if you use any, please send me a picture or, email me or send me a DM on Instagram. I just love hearing from y'all when you use these free resources. I had so much fun making these. I made a ton of free resources last year when I was pregnant because the pressure of creating resources that y'all would pay for just felt like too much. But for some reason, I had a lot of creative energy. So I just made a bunch of freebies. And so I just love hearing from y'all. So if you use those, let me know. I would love to hear from you. Okay. Now that we've covered that, I want to make sure I didn't forget since Valentine's Day is next week. Let's talk about packets, which I love so, so much. So first, let me just tell you what they are. I think there's a lot of misconceptions here. So let me clear it up right from the get-go. From my personal experience in teaching with packets, I view packets as a curriculum organizational tool. When you're using packets effectively, they really force you to batch lesson plan. And that means you're going to do all of your lesson plans for an entire unit at once in advance, not day by day. And when you do this, it causes you to align all of your resources, and it gives you the opportunity to provide your students with structure, organization, direction, and vision for what is to come in a unit. And now I know that batching isn't for everyone. I know that if you do commit to batching your lesson plans, you then are prioritizing organization and alignment over flexibility that when you are making day-to-day lesson plans, you have. So when you're making your lesson plans day by day, you're able to be a bit more spontaneous with your students. Kind of see how the conversation goes, how the pacing goes, and then you can decide what we're going to do the next day. And you do sacrifice that when you choose to batch lesson plan. But for me, I found personally, it works so much better and serves me and my students so much better when I use the packet organizational tool, because it holds me accountable to batch lesson planning, which holds me accountable to making sure that everything I'm doing is aligning from the very first instructional resource we use to every assessment question at the end of the unit, which I love. Okay, so packets are not just massive workbooks full of worksheets and busy work. That is not what packets are. Packets are not just copies on copies on copies, okay? I have printable packets, but I also include paperless digital versions of all my packets. So you can do these completely copy-free if you really wanted to. And packets, like I said, they don't even need to be printed on paper because you can do this all digitally. I don't know about you, I love writing by hand. I think especially when you're doing quantitative sciences like chemistry, like physics, and there's a lot of math, being able to write on actual paper to me makes a big difference. But I know that's not how everybody feels. So you can totally do this digitally. So don't let the idea of making a lot of copies be something that's limiting you from trying something new if this sounds like something that could serve you and your students. Okay, so here's how it works. Your packet should have some sort of cover page. And this cover page serves as an overview for your entire unit. On my cover page, I divide the unit into concepts. And again, this is an organizational tool that I learned from my team of teachers that I was on my first year teaching. So I didn't come up with this take a unit, divide it by concepts idea. This is something that I learned from some other teachers, much more experienced and much wiser than me. But it has served me so well over these last 10 years in the education sphere. So you have this cover page, you divide your unit by concept. And I have found that chunking units into concepts is so helpful for students, but especially my students with accommodations. Okay. So I take a unit and I divide it into 3 to 6 concepts. And I like doing it this way too, because then I can divide my tests by concept. And then so for some of my students with accommodations, it really serves them to take a test in 3 or 4 chunks. And I just give them each concept at a time. So it's not as overwhelming. But you're going to take your concepts, take your unit, divide into concepts, and then take your concepts and come up with a list of objectives, skills, and vocabulary associated with each concept. Okay, so if I'm teaching about, photosynthesis, the objectives are things that I want them to know, do, and understand by the time we take the test. The skills are really more like hands-on things I want them to be able to do. And then the vocabulary are specific terms they need to know in order to be able to read and understand questions that are going to be on the test. And so I divide my units this way. And this list then guides the selection of every instructional resource that I use for the entire unit. And it's then going to serve as the foundation for the summative assessments that I am writing. So if I'm giving a test at the end of the unit, every single test question goes back to this list that's the cover page for my unit. If I'm giving a non-traditional summative assessment, which I love doing, like a project or a lab practical or a research paper, I make sure it aligns with this list as well. And this cover page, y'all, is a work in progress. It's one of those things that you're going to make it and then you're going to keep tweaking it as you're lesson planning and designing your unit. And then after you teach a unit, you may tweak it a little bit more. So don't feel this pressure to make it perfect. Think of it as a living document that you're constantly going to be adding and tweaking to. I am currently writing a chemistry curriculum, and I cannot even tell y'all how many times I have edited the cover page of a unit as I'm writing the unit. Like I start making it, I start having ideas, and then as I'm creating lecture notes, I go back and tweak it. As I write a practice handout, it's tweaked. As I come up with labs and things, it's tweaked. As I write the tests, I go back and tweak it as well. I'm referring to this so many times because I just want to make sure from day one of a unit that it is crystal clear what these students are expected to know and that everything I'm going to give them thereafter is going to align from that. Yes, do we get off topic sometimes and do a deep dive into some real world questions that they have that aren't associated with the cover page of the packet? Absolutely. But I feel like students enjoy those off-topic conversations so much, knowing that there isn't like pressure. It's just, we're just chatting and here to learn. And it's not about what's in the packet and what we have to learn. What they really need to focus on when it comes to studying though, is what's on the packet. And it makes it so much less overwhelming for them. So after I create this cover page, the packet is then going to include every single handout, whether that's a paper handout or a virtual handout that I would administer during the course of a unit. So for me, that looks like lecture note outlines. I wish I was a teacher that could do like doodle notes or, those graphic notes, but I'm just not visually gifted in that way. So I can't make those. So instead, I use Cornell note outlines, which I really love. And I'll link a blog post in the show notes about how I use Cornell note outlines. But I give my students Cornell note outlines. I have in my units that I write for It's Not Rocket Science, I include like a blank version, a filled in version, and a fill in the blank version of these Cornell note outlines. So I include those. I include any lab handouts, project rubrics, activity overviews. If we're going to do an inquiry investigation, I usually have some sort of like guidelines or outline for us to design that together that's included. If we have any practice problems, if we have any concept maps we're going to do for review, all of these things go into the packet. So if it's something that you plan to give to your students at some point in the unit, you're going to want to put it in the packet. And each of these pages included in the packet is selected with intentionality and purpose, because the goal is not to just create a packet with a bunch of busy work. The goal, again, is that everything you put into this packet aligns and builds up towards whatever you hope to accomplish in the unit you're teaching. I don't know if you heard that, but I just completely whacked a picture frame on my desk because I talk with my hands and I get so excited. But this is so important to me. I'm going to hit all these things on my desk while I'm talking and flailing my hands around right now. But I just really want you to think really purposefully about what you are including and whatever goals you're working towards accomplishing with your students when you're teaching this unit. I'm a big fan of no labs just for the sake of doing labs. Like, if you're just like Googling and finding labs just to make sure you're doing a lab, like, is that best serving your students? Really consider if it's worthwhile. And I think I got into a really good habit of intentionality at the second school I taught in because I had no resources and I had no money and I was in a non-lab space. So if I was going to do a lab, it had to really, really matter. It had to be worth my own personal money coming out of my pocket to pay for the materials. And it had to be worth the time it took for me to coordinate with another teacher to switch classrooms so I could do this lab or whatever it took to make it happen. So I got really, really intentional with what I was doing. And I think that's really served me in the years to come and how I think about selecting instructional resources for my students. And then again, practice handouts. I'm not putting in practice handouts with 50 practice problems. I love a practice handout that has 10 problems on it. And honestly, if I'm going to assign it to students, I love to only assign the odds. And then if we need more reinforcement, we go back and do the evens. I mean, if they can do 5 problems about something, if they can do 5 Punnett square problems, they can do 20 Punnett square problems. So that's just something to really consider as you're doing this to help you too, if you're overwhelmed by how many pages you're including, to help you kind of, pare down what you're including there. So the point of teaching with packets is not to overwhelm students with a bunch of papers and assignments and busy work. The point is to create an organizational tool that, one, forces you as a teacher to be comprehensive and to lesson plan with extreme intentionality. It also, two, allows you to only have to make copies one time per unit and then only pass out papers one time per unit. Y'all, that saves so much time. If you can just go ahead and plan, I'm going to stay after for 30 minutes. I'm going to batch copy all of this, and then I'm literally not going to see the copier for another 4 to 6 weeks when we'll have to copy the next unit. It saves so much time. It also makes keeping up with your class much easier for your students because they're not constantly having to remember where all these random papers are because they get their one packet and they know it really, really matters, and they have to just keep up with that one thing at all times. And then also it really serves your students as an organizational tool because it helps them clearly know your expectations, which better sets them up for success. I will tell y'all something. When I taught AP biology for the first time, I was day by day lesson planning. I mean, I was doing my best to be like a week or two in advance so that I could make sure things were aligning and stuff. But like, it was my fifth prep. I was running student council. I was a part of this, school mentorship program with students. I was on the prom committee. I was in charge of that. Like, I had a lot going on. We were also going through the adoption process in my personal life. So like, I was just in survival mode when I was teaching AP bio, let's be honest. And I'll tell y'all, it really did not serve my students. And I was just doing the best I could. And they knew that. Like, I'm not feeling guilty about this. Like, you got to do what you got to do. But I will say, I feel like the units where I was ahead enough to be able to give them this kind of cover page at the start of the unit just served them so much better to know at the beginning, what's the end goal? What are the expectations of me in this unit? Whereas when I was going by day and I wasn't writing the test until 2 nights before, it made it a lot harder to prepare them to do well. And so I just want to encourage you that this is such a way to serve your students by giving them all of this at the start of the unit. Okay, so now let's talk about, hopefully that makes it clear what packets are. And if I didn't make it clear, please email me at Rebecca@itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com. Or shoot me a DM on Instagram at It's Not Rocket Science. Like, I want to hear from you and I want to help make it clear what these are because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what packets are. And people are just like, you're just giving them a bunch of worksheets. And that's not the case. Okay, so I really want to help clarify that if it still feels confusing. Okay, but now hopefully we can move on to, okay, so then what does it look like to teach with these practically? So I find that it helps if you can start using this strategy at the beginning of the year. Like with all things, if you start early and you start day one, your students know what the expectation is. Like if you start day one saying, this is how we're going to do things in this class, you're responsible for this packet and a pencil every day. Or if you're doing it digitally, saying you're responsible for bringing, a laptop or other tech device every day so that you have your packet. That really helps students know and take responsibility for keeping up with the packet. But obviously I know that this episode is not airing at the beginning of the year. That doesn't mean you can't still try it. I will say one of the nice things about trying something new this time of year, like going into the end of the year, is that it's short term. So you can try something just for the next couple months and see how you like it. And then if you like it and you feel like it's something you can keep up with, you can use this summer to kind of get ahead on your batch lesson plans and then really hit it hard next school year doing the strategy. So I want to encourage you with that. But so practically, you're going to give your students the packet at the start of the unit. I'm talking like day one, or you can do it at the end of the test day. Like test day's over, here's your packet, see you tomorrow type thing. Totally up to you. But you're going to give them this unit packet. And I like to, on the very first day of giving it to them, just kind of look through the cover page with them and explain, especially the first time you do this, how this cover page is the overview for the entire unit. And this is what they're going to study from. I actually had my students make study guides from the cover pages. And I have a blog post walking through the exact process of this. And I'll link that, of course. But basically, I have them answer the objective questions, define the vocabulary, and then know that if there are any skills, like in anatomy, in my transport unit, we're going to dissect a heart. And so obviously, I'm not necessarily expecting them to write. How would they write that on their study guide? Be able to, identify the functional components of a heart based on a labeled, dissected specimen. I can't expect them to be able to write anything for that, but even just having it there lets them know, like, this is something I might have to do. There might be a practical question on the test about this. And so it kind of just gives them a heads up. So I have them do this and I let them do the formatting however they want, as long as it best serves them. My only recommendation is I always am like, please don't just like write paragraphs on paragraphs. I want this to be a visual tool, like what's going to help you best study. So some students do their vocab on Quizlet. Some make actual flashcards. Some make flip charts. I encourage like Venn diagrams, charts, bullet points, like make it nice so you actually want to study from this. And again, I'll link in the show notes so you can see some visual examples of what I'm talking about. So again, we go through the cover page and then I show them all that's included. And so they can see how important the packet is. Like they need this every day. This is the only thing they need. Please don't lose it. And typically I will print, if someone loses a packet, this is a question I always get asked. If they lose it, I will print it again one more time from them. I always kind of print like 2 or 3 extra just in case. And oftentimes, I'll give one to, a resource teacher or something like that. But I'll give them one extra and I keep track of that. And then if they ever lose it again and ask for another packet, they have to print it on their own or they have to use the paperless digital version, which my students don't love using. I don't love using it either, but I made it for a lot of you who asked for it. So that's kind of how we deal with it. I've never had it be a chronic problem with students. And I think it's because they see how much the packet really helps them. Like they see how much easier it is for them just to have this like one big thing to keep up with instead of a bunch of random little things. And so they do really, really well with it. Okay. And then, so you give them the packet, you kind of walk through an overview of it and why it's important, and then you celebrate because now you're only going to the copy machine once per unit for the rest of the year, which is awesome. And if you're like me, hopefully you've recruited some sort of teacher's aide or a student who needs community service hours and you train them how to do this. And then you send them to the copier, once a month to do this for you. I've always had a teacher's aide. Again, I'll link a blog post in the show notes about why teacher's aides are like the greatest gift. The greatest free gift that your admin can give you to support you. But even if you don't have like a teacher's aid program at your school, I feel like having just a student who needs community service hours for anything, like it's so easy to teach them how to use the copier and then they can do this for you for 1 hour every couple of weeks and it'll save you so much time. And then I use like the industrial hole punch that we have in the copy room to go ahead and hole punch all of them. And so then when I give them to students, they can immediately put them in their binders. And you can do this a couple of different ways, but I have them separate each unit with like just a divider and then have like one binder per semester. But for me personally, I have a 1-inch binder for each unit because within my little 1-inch binder, I have, my CP or my college prep or on grade level version of the packet. I have my honors version of the packet. I have any answer keys. I have quizzes and tests in those keys in there. And then I usually have like a divider in the back that's just like random stuff I find that I may want to try, or like, here's a demo I printed out from Google. I might want to try this at some point, or some of the things that like, oh, here's something I did back when I was student teaching when I didn't have a scanner. And so this is the original copy of this. Like anything that you would normally put in a filing cabinet, you put it in the binder and it makes it so much easier for you to see it and to not forget about it. And then the other thing I love about the binders is I went to the dollar store and I got one of those like zipper pouches, those clear plastic zipper pouches that have like 3 rings on it or 3 holes to go in a 3-ring binder. And I have that at the front. And then any of my like station cards that I love using that I have laminated, I keep those there. So literally everything I need for the unit is right there. And I don't like bringing work home and I don't advise you to. But the nice thing is, if you ever have to, it's so easy just to grab your skinny little binder for that unit and bring that home and you have everything you need right there instead of having to keep up with a bunch of random papers or a giant binder or, whatever. So that's kind of how I practically get started introducing them with students and how we organize them. And again, you celebrate not going to the copier anymore, but also celebrate that you're done with lesson planning for the unit. So once you've made this packet, yes, it's a good bit of work on the front end, but now you're not scrambling the night before trying to figure out what you're teaching the next day. And there's no more stressing at 2 a.m. when you're up with the stomach bug because you don't know what your students are going to do with your sub the next day. Because listen, they already have everything they need. You can just point them to what they can work on next. Okay, I cannot tell you how many times. And I mean, I feel like I have a good immune system, but I can't tell you how many times, you wake up at 1 a.m., 4 a.m., and you're like, I feel strep throat coming on, or I'm, sick in the bathroom. And I had to, email the secretary at school and say, hey, no way I'm going to be there in the morning. Can you find me a sub? Have the students do pages 2 through 3. They already have these practice pages in their packet. Have them work on that. Or I have all my lecture videos on YouTube. Have them take notes on pages 2 through 5 using the lecture videos on YouTube. And, we'll go over it the next day type thing. And it's so nice because none of my coworkers are having to scramble to make copies for me. And even the secretary at our school, all she has to do is find a sub for me and print out the email I just sent her while lying on the tile floor in my bathroom. It just makes it so much easier. And then y'all, once you've done this on the front end, year after year that you're teaching this course potentially, all you're doing then is tweaking and you're pulling things out and adding things in and, working on that living document of a cover page. And it just gets better and better over time. And so that's where I just want to really encourage you. Don't feel like it has to be perfect the first time you make a packet. Just get some stuff down there that you're planning on doing. And then just know that this is something that's a work in progress for you and your students. Okay, so that's how you kind of get started using them practically. Now let's talk about some of the reasons why I think you should try this and why I'm just so obsessed with them. I just love teaching with them. They've helped me so much and they've helped my students so much. Okay, so here's just like a quick list because I know this is getting long of just reasons I love them and why I think you should try them. First, packets keep me and my students incredibly organized. Like if you struggle with organization, this will help you so much. I have all the pages numbered. It's just so easy in class to be like, okay, flip to page 5. We're going to do this lab, or flip to page 6. We're about to do these practice questions or whatever. And like kind of a sub reason why I love this underneath that is this organization is especially helpful for my students with accommodations and for the resource teachers that I'm partnering with. All of the resource teachers I've taught with over the years are so obsessed with the packet strategy. They're like, this is so helpful for me. And I go ahead and I give the resource teachers like the filled in versions. And oftentimes most of my accommodation students get the packets with the filled in notes at least, but I give the resource teachers the answer keys so they have them as a reference. They love those so much. And another thing is parents and admin love them too. It shows parents and admin how prepared and intentional you are with your instructional resources. And they can see how clear you are in your expectations for your students and how you're doing everything you can to support students and keep them organized. I can't tell you how many times I have seen a parent or an administrator be borderline wowed when I sit down with them in a parent conference and I pull up, and they want to talk about how their student made a D on the test. And I pull out the packet and I say, okay, so, see this question, this whole section of questions that they missed on this test. Let me show you what we did in class to learn about this and to reinforce this and to practice this. Let me show you on this cover page how I outlined how they would need to know this. And here's how, again, we reinforced it and learned it throughout the unit. So if your child's saying that I never taught them that, here's the evidence that that's not the case. And it serves you so well and it serves parents and admin so well to see like you're on it. Okay. And then it helps parents see how they can support their students with this organizational tool that you've given them in the packet. I love too that students rarely lose assignments. I don't collect a lot of assignments to grade for accuracy. And that's, something I've talked a lot about on the podcast just because I feel like grading is such a time suck and my time is so limited. But when I do collect something, it's so easy the next day when I'm going to be passing back a lab. Let's say I will say before I start passing it back, everyone open your packet and go to page 17. I'm about to pass back the lab that was on pages 18 through 20. And so they open their binders and I pass back the labs and they go ahead and put that graded lab right there in the middle of it. And so it really helps them with not losing assignments. But then you also don't have the burden of like an interactive notebook when you're collecting an interactive notebook and you have this like whole giant stack to the ceiling of notebooks you have to carry out or, whatever. So it just makes it a lot easier. You can still collect small stacks of papers, but then you can give them back really easily and they don't lose them. And then I've also found that students are more often likely to refer back to the work they've previously done, like practice problems, like labs, because it's so easy to find them and reference them. I love almost doing like a tour of the packet on our review day where we kind of walk through the different things we've done and we look through them again. I think this is one of the things I love about interactive notebooks is that the purpose is to make something visual that's really helpful for students that they'll hopefully refer back to when they're studying. And the packet does that in a way that's less arts and craftsy because you're not having to cut and paste a lot of stuff. And for your students that just like aren't into, just aren't as artistic or into that, it feels a lot more seamless to do it. But you still get that benefit that you get with the interactive notebook of having this thing that they can refer back to at all times. I love it too because students come to class every day prepared. They're not having to remember like, oh, I need my textbook today and I need that homework we did last night and I need that lab we're working on and I need loose leaf paper. Like they don't have to remember all those things. It's like they need their biology binder. They need their chemistry binder. That's what they need. And they know that everything's going to be in there because I've already given it to them for the whole year. I also feel like, the packet serves almost like a portfolio at the end of each unit or at the end of the year of all of the effort that they have put in. And it kind of chronicles the entire instructional process and the entire learning process. The binder of packets that they will have at the end of the school year is just a true representation of all they have learned. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Again, I also feel like teaching with packets holds me accountable. It keeps me from scrambling the night before to make lesson plans or the morning of to make copies. I don't have to worry about the copy machine being out of toner or not printing my black and white pages because it's low on magenta. And it's like, I don't even need magenta. I just need black and white. Like it really holds me accountable as a teacher to get things done in advance because I know that day one of the unit, I want to give them the entire packet. This works really well for me and it's really motivating for me personally. And again, I know that they require more time and effort on the front end, but I truly believe they save so much class time on the back end. And again, you can use these year after year. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You're just it's like adding air to your tires or, tweaking your tire rotation, however many times a year you're supposed to do that. You're just improving your practice and your instructional resources you're using with your students. It's not like you have to get new tires every single week, or every single month because you're just tweaking them and optimizing them year after year. And I'll say on this point is teaching with packets. I just really feel like they made me a better educator. And I'm so grateful for the teachers on the team that I was on when I first started teaching for introducing them to me. Like, again, I'm not trying to toot my own horn and be like, I'm an excellent teacher because of packets. Because again, this wasn't originally my idea. Other teachers gave me the idea and I have just truly run with this the last decade of my life as an educator. And I've just fallen in love with them. And I feel like I've seen them help so many teachers. And one thing I've said time and time again, if you have something that's working for you, don't feel like you have to throw it out the window and do packets. But if you're listening to this and you're like, I feel disorganized or I feel like I'm constantly behind, like try this. Use the rest of the school year and try something new and see if it works for you like it's worked for me and so many other teachers. Okay, and then last thing I'll say is I know you're going to want to know how to make your own. I know I gave kind of like an overview, but you're like, I need more. So I'm not going to lie to you. It takes a lot of time to do this and to do it right and to do it well. I've been doing this for a living for 10 years now, and I've been doing it to share to the level that I can share it with other educators for over 6 years now. So it's a process, but I have outlined that process for you and I have it in a blog post. So I'm going to link that in the show notes. It's called Curriculum Design 101. You can also go to itsnorocketscienceclassroom.com and search Curriculum Design 101 and you'll see that outline. But that is going to be there for you. I think it's something that's a little bit easier to read than hear. But if you're feeling overwhelmed and you're like, I want to do this, but like I don't have any capacity to get started mid-year, I'm just exhausted, take a deep breath. And if you teach biology, anatomy, or physical science, like I've done this all for you. And if you teach chemistry, I'm currently working on this. I'm making packet-based units for you. And so I'm releasing those as I finish those as well. And so I will link in the show notes where you can check these out. I really encourage you, like, I'm not trying to just be on here and be like, everyone buy my entire full year curriculum bundles. But I will say, if you feel overwhelmed, I really feel like just buying one unit to get you through the next month and try out the strategy could really, really serve you well and serve your students and give you a break. Like, give yourself the next 4 to 6 weeks off and try out one of my units that's completely done for you. And then you can use this next 4 to 6 weeks that you're not like lesson planning day by day to get ahead and lesson plan for the next unit that you want to do. And then you'll also kind of see really in depth how I organize everything to give you an idea for how to organize it on your end. And again, I'm going to link in the show notes blog post for how I walk through this process. But I do want you to know you don't have to do this from scratch. You can use the ones that I've already created for you if you want to invest in those. And again, chemistry teachers, thanks for being patient. I'm releasing these as I can, but I started writing the chemistry curriculum back in August. And so it's a process, but I'm hopeful to be done by this upcoming August. So stay tuned for that. And then last thing I'll say is one of the most asked questions I got when I did that Ask Me Anything episode back in episode 50 of the podcast was a more detailed look into my curriculum writing process. And then we have an entire unit. Well, there's kind of multiple units, on this in the Secondary Science Simplified Professional Development course. So I'll link the waitlist for that if you're interested. But I'm also planning on doing a 5-week, 5-episode podcast series over the summer on this as well. So there's a blog post you can reference. There's an entire course you can sign up for if you want that. But also know I will do a 5-week series on this. And I decided to wait until the summer for this because I know a lot of you are just like in over your head right now. You're like, I'm not writing a curriculum right now. But stay tuned because this summer, I'm hoping you'll have more mental capacity to kind of maybe do this and walk alongside this with me this summer. And so I thought that'd be a fun thing we'll do. So stay tuned for that this summer. And again, I'll just say, teaching with packets, it's truly been a game changer for me as a teacher. And I'm just so thankful that I was introduced to this organizational strategy my first year in the classroom. And I would love to hear from you. What's a strategy you learned from other teachers your first year that you're still doing to this day? I love to hear things that you've done from day one that you picked up from someone else. I think that's just so fun. DM me on Instagram and let me know, or email me. Again, I'll link how you can reach out to me in the show notes and let me know. It'd be fun if we come up with a good list of stuff. I would love to share those in an episode with everyone. Like things you learned your first year teaching from another teacher and you're still doing 5, 10, 15 years later. That would be so fun to hear. So let me know. And thank you again for tuning in to this episode. As always, all of the links I mentioned are in the show notes, which you can find at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 60. And as I mentioned at the start of the episode, I made 4 fun, free high school science activities for Valentine's Day. You could use them this week or next week. So grab those at bit.ly/INRSVday or by clicking the link in the show notes. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.